I'm Phil. I'm very Phil. I'm very Phil.
Superfly.
Hi everyone. So I am joined once again by the wonderful Russ Anber. So nice. We had to have him back twice. So we're here for part 2 of our interview today for the Superfly boxing podcast, and what a treat to once again have an audience with Russ. So much great stuff that we learned last time. That I just had to pick his brains again. It would be rude not to. Such a wealth of knowledge and experience in the sport. So I know there's quite a few questions that we didn't quite have time to get into because we were just so full up with content before topics. But it's going to be super interesting. How are you, Russ?
I'm good, Taylor. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and I really enjoyed doing the last one. So no worries about doing a second one, mate. It's fine.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. So roughly last time we finished off around, we started chatting a bit about Alexander Usyk, and I think we roughly finished off talking about the Gassiev fight. I remember I asked some questions about preparation.
Right.
And we had some interesting things about tailoring your coaching to the individual needs of every single fight that you've had. I know a lot of guys are very interested in Usyk specifically because of pound for pound right now, arguably the best fighter in the planet. On the planet, and I know that there's a few guys who are interested specifically in the Gassiev performance, and really, for me, one of the great masterclasses of the decade, if not potentially in the sport's history. Just a phenomenal performance. Do you have any insight into that fight or the build up? I know, Natalie, I think you said before, took charge of that. But yeah, just anything you have.
Yeah, Anatoly Lomachenko was the guy who put together the entire training program, and I think like in terms of preparation, certainly for physical preparation and the workload that a fighter goes to, I'm going to be hard pressed to say I know anybody who puts together a better physical preparation program than Anatoly Lomachenko. I mean, I have absolutely not one critique of what he does in preparing his fighters and the workload that they have to do. If you get through a training camp of what he prepares for you, there is no way, even if you don't win a minute of a round, which is highly unlikely, but even if you don't win a minute of a round, there is absolutely no doubt that you finish the 12 rounds and you finish them at a pace that your opponent has likely never seen before. He puts together a great program. The camp is hard. It's demanding. It's versatile. It consists of many things, not just boxing. It includes everything from playing games to rowing, to canoeing, to kayaking, to swimming. Everything is involved in that. Juggling. There are so many things that are involved in it, and to me, I humble. When I say I'm a trainer, I humble in comparison to the preparation and how everything is documented the way Anatoly does it.
One thing that I think is interesting, actually, that I've personally seen with Loma, with Usyk, is whenever I see them before a fight, they have this kind of air about them of quiet confidence. It's not brash, trash talk, I'm going to knock him out. But you can tell that they're supremely confident in their abilities. And knowing that they have it in them, they have the right team in them to get the job done. So one of the things I was going to ask is, in terms of psychological preparation, when you were working with Usyk, is there anything that you saw to get them in preparation for, these kind of high pressure situations where, they're going to be under a lot of duress, but they're still able to make adjustments?
You know what? I'm going to tell you what the difference is, Taylor, and I hope I say this without offending anybody, but this is because of their upbringing, This is there because of their culture. This is because of their religious beliefs. This is because of their education. This is because of the kind of people that they are, not the kind of fighters they are, but the kind of people they are. Because even the fighters of lesser, if you will, lesser quality than them, lower level than them, they all conduct themselves the same way. There is a certain upbringing, a certain class that they carry as men. There's an education. Whereas it seems in the Western world of boxing, and it's just gotten progressively worse as time has gone on, what started out perhaps of being, banter and chatter and braggadocio from Muhammad Ali has derailed into, profanity filled attacks at press conferences, physical altercations between guys who are only fighting a 4-rounder, for God's sakes. It seems like it's standard now that when you have a weigh-in, you have to have everybody on the undercard faces off with each other. Everybody puts their nose in the other person's face. Everybody pushes somebody. There's always something, some scuffle that happens. And you have to raise the question as to why the promoters or the TV or especially the athletic commissions don't put a stop to that. And they do it because they treat the fighters like freak shows. Go ahead, do it. You want to look like a fool? Go ahead and do it. Push each other. It's good for the gate. Gets people talking. And if you look at the way boxing fans today are, that's what they care about. They care about the trash talking. They care about he said, she said. I think one of the most disgusting and stupidest things I've seen in boxing is these things. I don't know if it was HBO who started it and Sky followed or vice versa, but where they have these face-offs at a table,
Yeah.
where they seem it's necessary to sit backwards in a chair, right? Because this is supposed to be like some cowboy kind of thing where I'm going to sit backwards in a chair and face off with you. And you have an agent provocateur sitting there, provoking you to say bad things about the person in front of you. And to me, that's just wrestling now. Now you're taking boxing to a wrestling level, and I think it's disgusting. I think it takes away from the quality of the athlete, from the legitimacy of the sport, from the legitimacy of the how talented these guys are. You're trying to make them out, and not everybody is equal in talent in terms of being able to have a verbal duel. But that doesn't mean nothing when it comes to the boxing ring. So why are you doing that? You're doing it so you can put together a show, so you can have your third person there acting like the agent provocateur of telling them what to say. Oh, he said this about you. He said that about you. You should be slapped for saying that, Shut up. No one wants to. I don't want to hear that. And the people who do want to hear that are not boxing fans. They're trash talking fans. They're the same people who sit behind a keyboard and say nasty things about fighters and disrespect fighters and say disparaging remarks about fighters. So I don't like those people anyway. So doing that appeals to those type of people, I've never liked it. So all that to say that this is not the education background that Lomachenko comes from. This is not something that Usyk comes from. This is not something we see Anthony Joshua doing. We do not something that you usually see somebody like Canelo doing. These are not what the athletes of the high level athletes are doing. And yet I wonder why the lower level athletes or the 4-round fighters or 6-round fighters or 8-round fighters or the rising stars choose to follow somebody else's stupid, ignorant example instead of following these guys' example.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I completely agree in terms of I think the theatrics have taken over from, guys have started paying attention to the theatrics rather than the actual quality of the fighters.
Correct.
Someone like Bud Crawford, for example, may not be a particularly brash talker or whatnot, but, he does his talking in the ring.
Correct.
Yeah, and it's super interesting because whenever I've seen opponents try to rile Usyk, so I remember just some of the guys, Tony Bellew, I think it was making remarks about Usyk, and same with Lomachenko, opponents have done the same, and he just seems completely unfazed. And even in the ring, I remember when Linares knocked down Lomachenko, and it just takes this incredible self-belief. He gets up, he recalibrates, he tries to solve his opponent again, he gets the finish. So what my question basically, it's a long-winded way of getting to the question of how much of that is due to the self-confidence and knowing that they're fully prepared, or maybe exercises like, I know Lomachenko, I don't know if it's the same for Usyk, is a big fan of going underwater for extended periods to hold his breath.
They all do it. They all do it.
Getting comfortable in uncomfortable, if you will, in those situations that you're in distress, just maintaining a cool head. I'm just interested to see how they've got that kind of mental fortitude.
Well, again, it's something they've been doing, since they started boxing. It's not something new. It's something they've been doing, and they're, like I said, they're educated. They understand it. They know why it's done. The science of training these guys is unlike anything the professional boxing world has seen before, and I'm telling you that sincerely. The science behind it it's not just a group of hanger-ons saying, hey, way to go, yeah, that's right, the champ is here. It's not that. There is a science behind this, from physical preparation to what they eat, to when they train, to what they need. Everything is about even the psychology of it. There is a science behind all of it. Even the dietitian who brings in the diet doesn't just do the diet because we know, so I don't know if I've told you this, but they don't just do this because they say spinach is good for you. They do it because they know that there's a reason that if such and such one person might need to eat a lot of spinach, the other person might not, if you understand what I mean. So it's not just generic, there's a science behind doing this, and it's unlike anything I've seen in my 40 plus years in this game.
So out of interest, this begs the question for me. We talked about their culture. Do you think these methods are applicable to Western boxers?
You mean, can they be applicable?
Can they be? Is it a culture thing where that kind of discipline that they have is something that perhaps would be more difficult to replicate with Western boxers? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I don't think it would be. I think all of the Western boxers who have success have their own set of certain discipline as well, to train. They're in the gym, they're doing their thing, they're very dedicated to their craft. So I think all of the ones who do that, I don't think would have any problem adapting to that system at all.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. It sounds like it's such a science and such, difficult conditions sometimes in the training camp. So I was wondering if this is something that you think is replicable or is going to be, post Anatoly, when Anatoly has left the sport, when Lomachenko is retired, are we going to be seeing more coaches adopt his methods? Some of the things that he's doing. Is this going to be something that's trendy now or here to stay?
Sadly, I don't think we're going to. We'll see them copy. We'll see people copying certain things. People will say, "Hey, that's a good idea. Let's do that." And then suddenly they're going to do it. But they don't know why they're doing it. They don't know what the science behind it is, because this is all based on an education system, not just for boxing, but for complete physical education. So unless coaching in the Western world takes on a new persona, until coaching in the Western world is perceived as a legitimate paid trade, no, I don't think we're going to see. I don't think we're going to see that very same system come into place and what coaches will do, simply because the science is not there for the coaches to do this with. The knowledge is not there from a scientific perspective. And again, there might be people that we include in this, and I know that there are a lot of people using strength and conditioning coaches, if you will. Some are simply strength and conditioning coaches that they've learned by watching videos on YouTube. And others are scientists. Others understand why we're doing things, understand why they are high performance trainers, why they condition athletes in a way they do it. And more boxing coaches are using these people. So I think there is more of a science coming through, but I don't think it's happening from a boxing coach's perspective. I think the boxing coach will remain somewhat as it is today in guys like myself, whose area of expertise is the gym, the boxing gym and boxing technique. That will stay the same, and I don't think that's where we're lacking. I think it's in all the other stuff where there is a lacking in the science and education that Anatoly would know, but now boxing coaches rely on other people to know for them.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because there's like I've seen even at the grassroots level over here, people are paying notice to some of the techniques and training methods that the Lomachenkos are doing, but I think it's more a case of imitated rather than replicated. It's a bit like
good point. Yeah.
It's a bit like when Mayweather kind of emerged and suddenly the shell, the Philly shell, Michigan shell, whatever you want to call it, became super popular overnight. And suddenly in the gym, you see so many people trying to replicate it, but they're not. They're imitating it, and often a poor imitation.
And the same thing with the choreographed punch mitt routine. Like all of a sudden everybody's doing this choreographed punch mitt routine that Mayweather did, and it went viral. And Mayweather did it for the cameras, and they did it because it was something different, and they put it together and for their use. And now people are thinking that is an effective way of training fighters, and it's not. It's not a teaching method. It's a choreographed method. So you're absolutely correct. It's simply replication. Absolutely.
So one thing that I am interested in as well to hear from you. So I remember you saying for the Michael Hunter fight, you were you took charge of Usyk's preparation, his training camp, and coached him. Since Usyk has joined the pro game, since his early fights, so around the Glowacki fight, around the Hunter fight, what do you think are his improvements that he's made as a fighter? And were there some weaknesses there that you saw that have been ironed out and he's continued to develop?
I wouldn't say there were weaknesses. I think there was adjustments. I think, you have to adjust to a pro game. You have to adjust to 12 rounds. You have to adjust to meeting in every fight. You're meeting the best in the world. You're not having like an easy draw where you have, okay, this fight we're fighting, our next two fights we're fighting two really not good guys, but next one is going to be against a tougher guy. You're always fighting good guys. So, you have to pay attention to that. I think attention to detail, I think, became important. At least what I understood as best with Usyk is, you do something in round one, that's great. You do it again in round two, but you have to be able to continue to do that. And it has to be unbroken and unchanged into round 11 and 12 as well, and all the way through. So there has to be that consistency. So no, I think that they have evolved. As you age, you gain wisdom. Even the worst athletes in the world, the worst people in the world, as they age, gain a certain wisdom and their conduct changes. I think that happens with everybody. So that's what we call experience and getting better and refining your craft. So I think they've taken a diamond and just continued to polish it. They certainly were not charcoal that turned into a diamond, nor are they a diamond that was turned into charcoal. I think they were a diamond that just kept getting polished better and better.
Fantastic. One of the things that, as well, when I look at Usyk and Lomachenko specifically in their games, it seems to me that there's a recurring pattern of starting somewhat slower, getting an opponent, the measure of an opponent, gauging their reactions, picking up on patterns, and especially in Usyk's case as well, down the stretch, turning the volume up to 11, really starting to put it on when they've worked their man out. Is that something you worked a lot on in your training camp? Is that something that they're very, very aware of adjusting to an opponent, and that's something they immediately look to do?
Never had to. They just did it. It seems to me like their MO is, to set a pace that the other horses just can't carry, to come out of the blocks at a pace where they'll stay with you for a while. They'll say, the jockey's on there and he's saying, I'm going to stay with you. You want to go fast? I'm going to go fast too, and they stay with you. And then you come out of that first bend and you're starting to make the turn and, round 5 is here and you're still going. Okay, I'm staying with you. But round 6, you're starting to pull away a little bit. Oh, I'm still with you. Round 7, oh, you start gaining. Now there's distance between you. And by the time you hit round 8, you're like, now you're fighting just to try to catch them. Never mind stay with them, just to try to catch them and keep up. And that's something that's very difficult to do when you've come out of the gate that strong, if you are not prepared the way they are prepared. And, they just like, I've likened them to Secretariat. And I've said this before about Usyk. I mean, the fact that Loma does it is, of course, incredible. But he's a featherweight, lightweight, super feather. Usyk is a heavyweight. Forget about this cruiserweight stuff. He's a heavyweight by standards of boxing history. He's a heavyweight, and the pace that he sets is phenomenal. And that's why I've always said this about Usyk, and even when I've trained, guys in heavier weight divisions, stop using the fact that you're a heavyweight as an excuse for not wanting to work. There is no reason that you can't you fight the same amount of minutes, same amount of rounds. You fight guys that are your weight. There's no reason you can't fight the way middleweights fight. And there's no reason why middleweights don't fight like lightweights. And if you look at the great ones, they all have been able to do that. And I think that's what separates Usyk from the rest.
It seems to me as well, it's not just physical, it's mental. I mean, there's so many, it's like, some guys are playing checkers, they're playing chess, I haven't really seen that kind of ring IQ since Mayweather, but, it's a very rare type of ring IQ that they always seem to be one step ahead, constantly adjusting to an opponent, and the opponents are often playing to their tune, So I think that kind of ring intelligence is something that really makes them stand out as well. I'm sure you agree, sorry.
There's no doubt about it. All part of, like I said, that education process. It's all part of that education. It's all part of what they learned growing up, how open-minded they were to learning it, understanding it. It's very difficult to do things or to ask an athlete to do something that they don't understand. It's either going to come to them very naturally, or they're going to have to be made to understand it and make it work for themselves. So if they're not made to understand it, it becomes very difficult for them to be able to execute it. And I think both Usyk and Loma understand this very, very well.
So you mentioned earlier about Usyk now being a heavyweight, and despite the somewhat rocky start with delays and whatnot, and all that sort of thing, we're all very excited to see Usyk have his crack at the top heavy guys. I mean, I'm not going to say like some people, oh, do you think Usyk will be okay at heavyweight? Because of course he will. Like there's no doubt in my mind that he's going to be absolutely fine. But what I am interested in is, I believe you've worked in the corner or your perhaps raps with Deontay Wilder.
For 5 years.
5 years, wow. So you know him very well.
Oh, yeah.
So what I'm going to say is some of the guys at the top level and stuff, I think for the majority of the guys, Usyk eats them up. I really do. But it's interesting. The matchups that excite me are, in my opinion, the toughest matchup for him at heavyweight would be Fury. But I'm interested to see what your thoughts would be on potential a Wilder fight, how you see that going, and just a bit of an analysis of Deontay's style and your thoughts.
Well, look, I think you're right. I think Fury would be the toughest fight, simply because he has in all my life I've been fascinated with two types of athletes. Either the small athlete, whether it be in baseball, hockey, whatever, the small athlete who succeeded in a world of giants, who was so good, was so fast, was so talented, that despite his lack of size, he competed his entire life, because he didn't just get small when he made it to the big leagues. He had been small his whole life and succeeded all the way through to get to the big leagues and become a star. So I've always been fascinated by undersized athletes who have competed against the giants and have been successful. The other thing that has always fascinated me is the big athletes who had the touch of velvet, who had that smoothness, that ability to be so graceful. And whether you think of players playing football, hockey, whatever it might be, that were so graceful doing what they do. One of my favorite sports, as you might have known or not, Taylor, is snooker. And when you see a guy like, I mean, you might not remember these names, but Big Bill Werbeniuk, a massive guy with such a delicate touch on the cue ball. To me, that always thrilled me. And Tyson Fury fits that bill. Tyson Fury, to me, is a guy who is so big when you look at him. And I've said this before, there are not a lot of heavyweights you can say this about. He may arguably be the most graceful and talented and agile big heavyweight that's ever lived. And I think the only guy that could come close to that is going to be Lennox Lewis in terms of size. Riddick Bowe, close again. But those were I don't know if they were quite as big as what Tyson is.
I agree with you. Yeah.
So to me, Tyson Fury doing that to me is outstanding. And that style, that grace, that fluidity, that athleticism, when it's trained, when he prepares properly, that is going to be a nightmare for anybody, and probably for anybody that ever lived. Never mind just about today. For anybody that ever lived, this would have been a nightmare.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's some concerns I had with one of the things that has made me even think higher of Fury is the versatility he showed in the Wilder rematch. We often think of him being at his best as a stick and mover, but showing some really good looks, coming in behind a sharp jab, bit of proactive entries, head movement in the entries and stuff, and being able to really take the fight to Wilder. It's something where a lot of us, I remember when I did the predictions piece for our website, I didn't think he had it in him. And he's continued to prove people wrong. And really, this is basically what it comes down to for me. He's so skillful, so agile, incredible feet for a big man. And Usyk, I would say, has the better feet, but they are both absolutely fantastic at moving. So it comes down to me, is Usyk so good that he can overcome those length advantages that Fury has and win that fight? I'll be interested to hear your takes on it.
Well, listen, I mean, if there's one guy who could do it, I think it is Usyk. If there's one guy who can solve the big fella, I think it is Usyk. I think he has the pedigree. I think he has the agility. I think he has the smarts. I think he has the speed. There's no doubt that Fury holds a decided height and reach advantage over him. Usyk is going to have to adapt to that differently, and I think that Fury will have to adapt differently as well to somebody like Usyk. So to me, it's a very, very interesting fight. To me, I love it, but like I've said before, Fury, whether it's Usyk or any other heavyweight that ever lived in the history of boxing, Tyson Fury gives anybody fits, and you're in a nightmare fight when you're fighting Tyson Fury at his best.
I agree. I think I'm super excited to see how he does at heavyweight. I think that some of the talk of him, will he be able to take a heavyweight's power? He's just fought Murat Gassiev. It's completely bonkers to me. But there are some absolutely fantastic matchups there for him. And as well, so my final question for today, as I know we're a little bit pressed for time, is Lomachenko specifically as well. There's been quite a lot of talk about the Teofimo Lopez fight. And one thing about Loma, more of a difficult spot in some ways, because he's at 135. He's hit his weight ceiling, by all accounts. It looks like to me, at least.
I agree.
And with Usyk, he's potentially got that signature opponent in Fury, a guy who, can really stake his claim at, all-time greatness if he does get that win. Whereas with Lomachenko, since Mikey Garcia has fled up to 147, to welterweight, it kind of feels to me like he's having to build his resume with depth rather than a standout name, a truly pound-for-pound elite talent. You could make the case for Rigondeaux, and I think that's a fair argument, but, that career-defining win. So What do you think that might be for Lomachenko? And what are your opinions on his career going forward?
You know, it's Loma has had to give up. I mean, in pool hall parlance, you know, he's had to give up so much weight. You know, like he's given advantages to everybody, and usually in size. You know, to be able to make competitive matches, and they've just been saying, well, listen, you can't fight guys at featherweight anymore because in one fight you've cleaned out the division. You can't fight anybody anymore at 130 because in one fight you've cleaned out the division. And you know, they've said, okay, you got to move up to lightweight, where now you're fighting guys that, for all intent and purposes, and Taylor, remember, I'm talking to you about this from 40 plus years in the sport. These guys that you see fighting at lightweight today, they're not lightweights. They're junior welterweights or welterweights. And the only reason that they're fighting at lightweight is because they have the privilege of weighing in up to 36 hours or maybe more sometimes before a fight. So, you know, they're not legitimate lightweights anymore. So all these guys have a decided weight advantage over Loma that normally you would never make if you had to weigh in on the same day. None of these guys would. Loma could still fight at 135 if he weighed in on the same day. He'd be a legitimate lightweight if lightweight still weighed in on the same day. But right now, the 135-pound class is no longer a lightweight class. They enter the ring as full-fledged welterweights, and that's a little bit disheartening for somebody like Loma, because I always said that he might have the shortest career in boxing history that puts him into the Hall of Fame, because he literally wipes out a division with one fight, beats a guy. I mean, like, let's say he blasts Teofimo Lopez out of there. Let's say he wins an easy fight over Teofimo Lopez. Now, I don't think it'll be easy, but I'm just trying to set the stage. Who else is there that you can sell to say, hey, let's put Loma against this guy? You know, in one fight, he empties the division. And I think, you know, that it's sad that so many other fights are available to him that the opponents won't take. They just talk but won't take. Gervonta Davis, among others, that you had the opportunity to fight Loma, and your own promoter, while you are a reigning world champion, says, oh, no, you need more seasoning. How can you be a world champion and need more seasoning?
I completely agree. You know,
so, yeah.
It's a tough one, because I feel like as well there are some guys, you know, right now at 135 who are really coming up, and you know, look like they could very well be very, very promising talents. Devin Haney, for example. But you know, it's a case of, do you build historical kind of meaning at the weight by fending off these young guns, these young challengers, or perhaps, I don't know, Shakur Stevenson, someone like that emerges from a couple of pounds down. You know, I do feel sorry for him. Where are the challenges? And if there are challenges, are they going to take it?
That's right. That's right. And I think the last fighter I would say who fell into that was Roy Jones. I think Roy had to go up and fight at light heavyweight when everybody knew he wasn't a light heavyweight. And then he had to move up and fight John Ruiz at heavyweight. And, you know, he just struggled so long for opponents who people actually felt could beat him, to make fights competitive. Whereas prior to that, or during that time, if you will, De La Hoya, as popular as he was and as good as he was able to always make money and always have those career-defining fights, because there was always hope that a certain opponent could possibly beat Oscar. And Oscar was involved in a lot of close fights, a lot of competitive fights. Roy, you can go back on his career, and from the beginning of his career and right through his prime, you'd be hard-pressed to find rounds that he lost, let alone competitive fights. You'd be hard-pressed to find rounds that he lost. And I think that's the same thing for Lomachenko.
Yeah, I agree completely. So I'm going to wrap that up for today, as I know we're both a little pressed for time right now. But thank you so much for your time, Russ. It's been a pleasure to speak to you once again. And yeah, hopefully we can get a part 3. I still have some questions to ask you about Anjo Espinosa, a favourite of both of ours, as
Yep.
well as talking about Rival gloves. I have a few interesting questions regarding Rival.
Well, then we have to do it again then, Taylor. You're a gentleman, you're a good guy, and very respectful, and it's lovely having this conversation.
Oh, it's a pleasure to speak to you as well, Russ. You know, so knowledgeable. I love having your insight, hearing about your insight and your experiences. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. And it's been a pleasure once again. And here's to part 3 whenever it may be.
I appreciate it, brother. I look forward to it.